Hi, boys and girls. It's almost Christmas. It's another week closer. You know, I wanted to tell you a specific story this week. And I looked and looked and looked through all my books and I couldn't find it anywhere. But I thought, well, I will just tell it to you as I remember. And it's called A Deposit in Heaven. Well, Andy, he lived on a farm, and his job was to help his father with the animals and the crops and his mother with the garden. It's a lot of work to run a farm. Well, there was one desire that Andy had. He wanted above anything else. He wanted a gun for Christmas. Now, I wouldn't recommend a gun to any one of you boys and girls, but in those days, there were wolves and coyotes and things that ate the animals and could attack the people. And Andy was big enough that his father had said he could have a gun. Well, then the mail came. It was still a few weeks to Christmas, and Andy got a letter. Have you ever gotten a letter in the mail? Well, Andy never had, but he noticed the return address was from his uncle. And when he opened it and read the letter, it said how proud his uncle was of him. And he sent him a gift of $25. Now, $25 in this day and age wouldn't buy a whole lot, but in those days, it would buy lots. And he said, I can have my gun. And when he got through with his chores, he rushed in the house and he got out the Sears Roebuck catalog. Now, in those days, because the stores were so far away and the little towns that were close to where the farmers lived and that didn't carry a whole lot, people ordered out of the catalogs and it came in the mail. Well, he sat down and he got the order blank out of that catalog and he started filling in the lines. And he thought, after I've paid my tithe, I can do all these things. So he ordered his gun and he ordered ammunition for it. And he ordered a couple other things that he really needed. And he folded up that order blank. He put it in an envelope and he wrote their address on it and the return address. And he said to his dad, Dad, can I walk to town? His father, he looked out the window and he said, well, it snowed and snowed and snowed. Those drifts are going to be awfully, awfully deep. And he said, I know, but it'll be okay. And see, the sun's coming out. And his dad looked, he said, yeah, you're right. The sun is coming out. Okay, I know you're anxious to order that stuff. So you go ahead and go. Well, Andy, he put on his scarf and his coat and his boots and his hat and his gloves. And he started off with that letter securely inside his coat pocket. Well, he decided to walk down the road because he thought that would be easier walking, right? But none of the roads were plowed like we have now. And it was one drift after the other. And it didn't look like anybody had gone on the road at all. It was really hard going. And the snow wasn't frozen on top, so every step he took, he sunk into the snow. Whew. Well, when he hadn't even got halfway to town, he decided that maybe it would be easier to walk through the fields, because when the wind comes, it will blow the snow up against the fence and things, and maybe there wouldn't be as deep a drifts. Well, he knew what direction to go to get to town, so he headed off in that way across the fields. Well, he had gone several miles when he saw a little farmhouse and a barn off in the field. And he thought, well, maybe I could stop and see if I could get warm just for a few minutes. So he headed toward that house. And as he was walking by the barn, he heard the animals. The cows were mooing, the sheep were making noise, and the chickens were making an odd noise. And he thought, well, maybe the farmer's taking care of them. So he pushed open the barn door and he looked inside, and what he saw didn't make any sense to him at all. The cows were mooing, but their heads were hanging down, and some of them were laying down on their sides. Cows don't lay on their sides. Nothing looked good in here. There was no food in the manger for them. There was no water in the trough. And he thought, what kind of a farmer would do this? Well, then he shut the door to the barn and he headed toward the house. He thought, maybe there's something wrong. And then he looked up, and there was no smoke coming out of the chimney. And he thought, it's the middle of winter. Something really bad must be going on. So he quickly made his way up to that porch, and he knocked on that door, but nobody came. He thought he could hear something in there. He turned the doorknob, and it wasn't locked. He pushed the door open, and he stood inside the house. He looked around. He could hear something, and he started calling out, "Anybody home?" When he didn't get an answer, he started walking from room to room to room. Finally, he came to a bedroom in the back of the house. He knocked on that door and he could hear a noise, but he didn't know if they said come in or not. But he opened the door, and there was a man and a woman in bed, terribly, terribly, terribly sick. They were coughing, and he could tell that they had fevers. And the father, he looked at Andy and he said, "Can you help us?" Then Andy looked around. There was a baby in the basket, and there were 3 other little children, much too little to go for help. And Andy said, "How can I help you?" Already he could feel how cold it was in that house, and he said, "Do you have wood in the woodshed?" The man nodded his head, and he said, "I'll go get wood and build a fire." And he did, and he filled the wood box, and pretty soon he had that stove going hot and crackling. Then he looked at those children who were following him around and looking. And then he realized that everybody in this house was starving. and the baby couldn't hardly cry. It was so hungry and thirsty. He went into the kitchen, and there was almost nothing in the cupboards. He found a little bit of oatmeal. So he went out to the well and he brought in a bucket of water. And on the top of that stove, he took a kettle and he cooked that oatmeal. Such as it was better than nothing. He set those children at the table, and their faces were just food. And he gave each one of them some of that until it was gone. Then he went in to see the parents again. He brought them in a little bit, but he didn't think they could even eat it. He said, "I'm going to go get you some help. I'll be back just as soon as I can." So he set off to that town, which was his original destination. And when he got there, he went into the store, and it was one of those old-fashioned stores, and the clerk was behind the counter, and he said, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yes, I need to buy some food." And then he told the man about the family that was sick and starving children. And he said, "I think I need potatoes, and I need flour and sugar and salt, and I need a bag of apples, and I need canned milk for the baby, and I need some vegetables." And by the time he got to the end of all the things that that family needed right away, his $25 was gone. And he thought, "Oh well, they need it worse than I need a gun." So he gathered that all up. The man had put it in a big gunny sack for him, and he carried it over his shoulder because otherwise he couldn't have carried it in his arms, and he had to get it home. He went all the way back to that farm. When he got there, he came in and he said, "It's just me." And while he'd been at the store, the man at the store had showed him some medicine that might help, and he had bought that too. So he went and he gave the mom and dad more water to drink and some medicine. And he looked at the children, and he had gotten some crackers. So he gave them some crackers and he said, "I'm going to make you some supper." And they looked at him all eagerly. He went in the kitchen and he made a pot of potato soup. It was something he knew how to make. And then he set the children down. He had already fed the baby some of that canned milk, and she had contentedly gone back to sleep. Well, he had changed her diaper and cleaned her little bed, and he went in to try to help the parents. He had bought some meat and he had put a little bit of that on to cook. He was going to make some broth for the parents. He said, "I'm going to make a big pot of soup so you have something to eat until I can get back with help." So after he had fed the children and he had gone out and he'd taken care of the farm animals again, he said, "I will be back. I'll bring help." And they laid down in a sigh of relief. It was a long walk home. When he got home, when he first got there, he was excited and he told his mom and his dad about the family on that farm that was freezing to death and starving to death. And the parents were sick and couldn't even get out of bed. Well, before he could even finish the story, his mom went to the kitchen and started gathering things out of their cupboards. Food, food from their cellar downstairs, food that she had canned. And she turned to the father and she said, "Go get the sleigh and hook it up to the horses. I have to go right now to see if I can take care of them. Those poor people and those babies and children." So she put on her warm wraps, and Andy once again put on his, and he and his mom set off over the fields to that little house. And when they got there, Mom took charge. She knew what to do with sick people. She knew how to take care of small children. And before Andy could even think of what to make next, she had whipped up fresh biscuits, and she had taken some of that broth that she had warmed up into the parents, and she had made sure that they were warm and their bed was clean. And she'd taken care of that sweet little baby and fed her. And the children, after having something to eat, the children were much more lively. And so she sat down to play with them for a little while the parents got to rest a bit. Finally, she said to Andy, "I think I should stay here and take care of them. You take the sleigh and go home." So Andy did. When he got home, he told his father all about what they had done there, and his father seemed pleased. He said, "I'll go tell the other neighbors so that they can come and help too." So he went out to do that. Well, Mother stayed there for several days, and the neighbor ladies all came with food, and the men came and helped clean out the barn and get the animals all settled in. Well, a couple weeks passed, and Andy's dad said, "I got the mail, but it's been a long time now. You should have gotten your gun by now." Andy said, "Yeah, I should have," but his dad said, "Didn't you mail your letter?" He said, "No, Dad," and he didn't say anymore. Well, the next morning, his dad said, "Andy, come on, go get your money. I'll take you in the sled, and we'll go mail that." And Andy said, "I don't need to go, Dad." His dad looked at him and he said, "Andy, what did you do with your Christmas gift?" And Andy looked at his father and he said, "I deposited it in heaven." And then his father understood. Andy had spent his Christmas money to help a family in need. Boys and girls, whenever there's a need, make sure you take care of it. And God will have His angels record all those wonderful things that each of you boys and girls do for your families and for other people. And if that little voice in your head, which you and I have talked about, and we know that that's that little voice is the voice from God telling you what you need to do. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.